Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and today I'm going to tell you all about the books that I read in the latter half of November. So I read 4 books in the latter half of November. I really enjoyed all of them for the most part. So the first one that I read is Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie. Yes, I finally read this. It's not going to end up on my TBR every single month of the year because I finally read it. This follows a soldier who used to be a whole starship but is now just one ancillary, essentially. This person basically confronts someone who used to be a captain on that ship, and all this stuff happens basically, and that captain has no idea that she is the ship. And what's interesting about the world of this story is that all the characters in it basically just have the pronoun she, regardless of whether they're male or female, basically. And it's not that there are no males, essentially. Like, everyone, but essentially there's only one gender. So it is a kind of interesting in that not only does their language not have gender pronouns aside from she, so everyone's just she, but also the concept doesn't even exist, basically. So the main character even gets somebody's pronoun wrong when they're speaking a different language that does have different gender pronouns, and says, like, sorry, I can't tell, I can't see under your clothes, I can't tell. And even then, even if I could, that's not an indication necessarily of what gender you are either. And so that's kind of an interesting, like, point of the story. Like, the whole point is that you don't know what someone's sex is, and it doesn't matter because gender is all just a thing that is entirely relative and all of that. So it's definitely really, really interesting. I really enjoyed the characters of this story. A lot of this story is, like, not very action-packed. It's a whole lot of just sitting there talking, but it's really interesting. And I definitely do plan to continue this series. I don't know when I will necessarily do that because it's not a book that, like, left me wanting to grab the next one right away or anything, but I definitely did really like it. Next, A Queen in Hiding by Sarah Kozloff. This is the first in a series that all came out this year, like the whole series came out. Pretty sure she probably just, like, wrote it as one really long book and then realized that that would be like a 2,000-page book or something, and then it became a whole series because supposedly it all, like, each one picks up where the previous one left off, like, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, so it's all one continuous, like, story. But essentially this is about a princess who she and her mother, the queen, get, like, kicked off by some evil guy, all of that. So she ends up having to grow up pretending to be a peasant and all of that, and her mother has this ability to make people forget stuff and everything, so she makes the adoptive parents of her, like, believe this total other story so that they won't even know that she's the princess, even though they did before and all that stuff. So it's definitely, like, really interesting. So I definitely really, like, I really just read, like, sped through this book. It was really, really good and really fast paced, and the world is really interesting. Like, even though a lot of it kind of takes from, like, medieval-esque fantasy and whatnot, it does have some really interesting things about the world. Like, there are, cats that are very connected to the royal family, so they, like, know what's happening to them and all this stuff, and they're, like, these big cats that, like, guard everything, and they live for hundreds of years or something, from what I could gather. So it's definitely, like, really interesting, and people's hair colors are different. Like, there are people who naturally have, like, pink or blue or whatever colored hair, and so, like, people with brown hair are, like, common. I mean, I don't normally read books that are set somewhere where, like, a lot of people naturally have, like, purple, pink, blue, whatever hair, essentially. So it's definitely really interesting that that was a part of it. So the chapters kind of go from a whole bunch of different people's points of views. So you would, like, basically be reading from one person's point of view, and then like, you wouldn't hear from that person again for, like, many, many chapters, basically. And so in that kind of way, I didn't enjoy this book as much, just because it was a little bit like, I'd kind of be like, hey, where did that person's chapters go that I was really enjoying, like, blah de blah. So it kind of, like, took me out of the story a little bit, but I kind of expected that because that does happen a lot with large fantasy books that have a lot of characters. Obviously, sometimes you go, like, forever not hearing from the same characters again, and then it's, like, years later and you're like, what the hell happened to them? So anyway, And then another thing too is that I find is missing from a lot of stories that have to do with like trying to take back a throne or whatever is the sense of urgency to it. Like, why does the princess even want the throne back? Like, what is the evil guy actually doing to make the kingdom worse or anything like that? That's something that I find is missing from a lot of stories, whether they're like newer fantasy books or older ones. Like, a lot of times you just don't get why it's so bad that the evil guy has the rule of the kingdom. All of that, like, you see them, I mean, in this one, we get a lot of chapters from the point of view of the villain, certainly, and we see him being a douchebag to, like, his wife and son and people in the palace and servants and nobles and whatever, but we don't really see what he's doing to make, like, the lives of people in the kingdom overall, like, worse or anything like that. So, to me, I kind of kept feeling like, why does the princess need the throne back? Like, why is that a thing that's so, like, where's the urgency there, kind of? So for me, that part was missing, but again, it was something that I kind of expected, because that is the same with a lot of fantasy books that have to do with, like, a royal main character trying to take their throne back. Like, it happens all the time. It's like the bad guy just wants to rule and stuff, and that's the only reason they took the throne and bothered kicking out an entire, like, family or whatever. So I don't know, it's just interesting. I have no idea. But anyway, overall, I really enjoyed this book and I highly recommend it, and I definitely plan to read the rest of this series. I don't know how soon that will be, but, like, hopefully somewhat soon. Then I read the Socialist Manifesto by Bhaskar Sunkara, and this is a book that kind of just describes what, like, socialism is and how, and kind of points out that socialism is what naturally comes after capitalism in a society, and it's basically like the solution to capitalism, but somehow it just never went that way in the US, and kind of why and what we need to do to make that change and all of that other stuff. So it's very, very interesting, and I really enjoyed it. There are definitely some chapters, like, it starts off presenting the information in, like, a really cool, interesting way, and then the very next chapter, it's like it just starts presenting things in a really boring way. So it took a little while to get through, even though this is not a long book at all. It's like 200 pages, like, no big deal. But it was very much like I had to really sit there and, like, think about it and stuff. But anyway, yeah, I definitely recommend this. And lastly, I finally read Space Unicorn Blues. This has actually been on my TBR for, like, a couple of months now. I had planned to read it over the summer for the space opera September readathon, and I just never ended up getting to it, and then it ended up being one that I had, like, planned to get to ever since then. So I finally read it. It's definitely really good. It's basically about a space unicorn dude who's, like, half human, half unicorn, and some other characters, and they're trying to do all this stuff. It's really crazy. It's definitely a very outer spacey story, and I really loved it. So the main character is, like, a half unicorn, and unicorns are asexual, and but some of them do end up having offspring, obviously, because asexuality is a little bit different for everybody. And then one of the other main characters is a Maori lesbian in a wheelchair, and she's really badass. And just overall, the whole this whole book is full of, like, different genders, different identities, all this other stuff, and I really, really enjoyed it. So anyway, it's definitely a pretty quick read, too. I read most of this book in one sitting, even though it's, like, 350 pages. I read, like, a good 250 pages of it in, like, one sitting. It's, yeah, even though it's, like, not one that I was, like, flying through it necessarily, it was just such a quick read once you get used to the setting. Oh, and there's also a trans main character. I totally forgot to mention that. Characters all have very distinct personalities, too, and I really enjoyed reading about them. So those are the books that I read in the latter half of November. Let me know if you've read any of them, have any thoughts on them, any of that at all, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!